Well, it's that time of the week again. It's Friday, which means, well, I have Elon here and it's Israel update. What has caught your eye this week,
What has
Elon?
caught my eye this week? Well, what has dominated um the social media and the press here? There's a couple of the large stories, the ones that really are raging. The first is to do with the way things Israelis are perceiving what has been happening, particularly in the aftermath of the comments by J.D. Vance, that Israel will not be allowed to annex the Judea and Samaria, and so there's been quite a lot of back and forth over this, and for example, this was an account on X that I follow, and the author here remarks, he says. Now, he says, Trump speaks not just as an ally, but as a man who sees Israel's decisions as his to overrule. I stopped him, Trump said about Netanyahu. It could have gone on for years, but I stopped him and everybody came together when I did. That sentence cuts deeper than most realize, because behind it lies a message Israelis can feel that Israel's sovereignty, our right to act, defend, and decide for ourselves, is being treated as conditional. This is the first time in years that an American president has spoken so bluntly about not supporting Israel, but about, sorry, has spoken so bluntly not about supporting Israel, but about controlling it. Now, I thought this is a very telling comment about the way people are perceiving the events of the last weeks. Now, of course, this is in the aftermath of the J.D. Vance comments
Let me ask you a
because
question real quick,
you go on,
Elon. So,
yeah.
given that you had a troubling comment like that from coming from Trump, um, is this pushing Israelis to more so develop their own munition factories, their own ways to replenish their own war materials, so that there is
I
less
well,
dependence on the United States?
I think that's been coming anyway since the Biden administration. Israel has realized the need to lessen its dependence upon U.S. munition supplies. Because though we have a friendly administration with Donald Trump and we really appreciate that, you know, administrations can change. You don't always know uh, who the. I mean, everyone's hoping the Democrats won't get in for the next 50 years, but even after what they've done, I mean, but even then, I mean, you know, we understand that, Donald Trump, and rightfully, is about America first. Now, where, his their policies concerning America clash with our interests over here in Israel, and that can happen, obviously. I mean, in this case, we can see there's some tension. Then we want to be able to have that freedom to operational freedom to defend ourselves and not be overridden by other concerns. So these comments of Vance's of JD Vance, they came in the aftermath of what was a Knesset vote on West Bank annexation that took place on Wednesday during his visit. Now, yes, it has been presented as a symbolic vote, and in a way it is symbolic, but it's also indicative of the strength of feeling on this issue across, across the political spectrum in the Knesset. I mean, I think the votes probably about 80% are in favor of this at some point happening. So when when we are told that the West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel, And the policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel, that it will and that policy will continue. It's not, this is not this symbolic vote does not represent some fringe minority. It represents the majority feeling now in the country. So um, it shouldn't just be dismissed as insulting or something stupid. Yes, maybe it was a political stunt, but it's not something that is empty. Behind it is a strong national feeling. And of course, we know eventually, biblically speaking, prophetically, that there will be um, some kind of renewed Israeli sovereignty over that. I mean, of course, in the millennium, yes, but even before then, there's something going to happen because, of course, it's connected all to do with this matter of the temple. Okay, now all connected with this, there were a number of other issues as well. Now, uh, the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he was calling recently for the death penalty for terrorism. Now, the death penalty should be reenacted, and if it isn't, he's saying that he will remove himself and his followers from the coalition so that the government is forcibly dissolved at a certain set date in the future. Now, this isn't just some kind of political posturing, because there's a lot of concerns that stand behind this, which I think are very, very genuine. And one writer in, I think it was Israel Hayom, I think, just this Friday, and this is a very, very interesting. She says that nobody in the international community is demanding that the kidnappers, of course, from 10/7, be punished for their crime, just as no one sought to prevent them from reaping the benefits of their actions. The terrorists achieved a threefold success through the hostages. Now, this is when we can start to see, when I read these out, the negative sides of this ceasefire deal, what actually Israel has sacrificed. And he says that while President Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza includes certain components that represent significant gains for Israel, yet there is one troubling issue, he says, the normalization of the abduction of Israelis has been entirely absent from discussions about Israel's achievements in the war and the debates surrounding the day after. And he says the war's conclusion really offers little comfort. The bottom line is that from the perspective of the Gazan Islamic terrorists, the abduction and holding of Israeli citizens as hostages in Gaza has paid off. In fact, the terrorists managed to exploit the hostages in three distinct ways, he said. First, they used them and the families of some hostages as a means of pressuring Israeli society and its leaders in an effort to force Israel to end the war without achieving the total military destruction of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And not only that, of course, you've seen if you've watched some of the more local Israeli news, the the riots and protests, the anti-Bibi protests, many of which are paid, funded protests. They're not natural, spontaneous ones. But the very hard left within Israel has used these things to bring division and trauma to Israeli society. Anyway, but the second reason this person gives, he says, secondly, the hostages served as human shields for the terrorists and their military assets. That this worked for them at least partially because the Israeli defense forces avoided operating in those areas in Gaza where, according to intelligence estimates, the hostages were being held. Thirdly, he says, the release of hostages through various deals yielded precisely what the terrorists wanted. In the initial exchanges, When kidnapped minors and women, the elderly, and the wounded were freed from Gaza's underground prisons, the perpetrators achieved a number of gains: a pause in fighting that they used to regroup, humanitarian supplies that strengthened their control, and of course the release of terrorists from Israeli prisons. In the current deal, they secured another major prize of 2,000 terrorists, including some of the worst murderers who deserved to be sent to hell, were set free. And he closes the article, and with this thing about now that the abduction of Israeli civilians has become almost normalized, and no one blinks an eyelid about it. And he says, to the credit of Israel's leadership, they did not capitulate and refused to yield to all of the kidnappers' demands. But populist calls to give Hamas everything it wanted just to get the hostages back were rebuffed by Bibi, which is, difficult for him, but it was absolutely right. It's because, of course, you remember that, Yahya Sinwar, that murderous scumbag who was head of Hamas for a while, and people like him, they were released as part of the Gilad Shalit deal, and they came back and committed further acts of terror. So all of these reasons are behind, I think, the next are linked with the next thing that seeing here in the news.
But real quick question before you go on. Is in your mind the fact that what we're seeing is the cost of this peace deal, the hubris that goes into it, is it just something so that President Trump can say he did something on peace? And what is the cost of that? Like you said, this normalization of taking Israelis and using them as tools to get concessions, that's a bad precedent for the future of Israel.
Yes, I think this deal is a two-edged sword, and the one sense it might help towards bringing normalization with certain Arab states, but there's a cost because this normalization, it if it comes at the price of leaving the uh, certain terror elements uh, still uneliminated, then and leaving Israel still in danger, and of course this whole situation of making these kind of things more normal, that it becomes acceptable to kidnap Israelis. This is not good either. Look, it got the hostages back, and that needed to happen. But I think I think it's one of those deals where the chickens will come home to roost again sooner or later. I mean, we look already. Hamas broke it within about a day. They reneged on their commitments very early on. So, it hasn't really even finished the conflict in Gaza. And so, then again, with Hamas, everything that they say nearly, or, unless it suits their purposes, everything they say is a lie and they can't be trusted. But so at least we didn't have our expectations there disappointed. Anyway, this is another person she was writing again about this whole subject of the death penalty and why it changed her. This person was she's a columnist again for, I think it's Israel Hayom, and she was saying at one point that she used to be indifferent about the issue, but because of what has happened, of course, over the last years and the way that this has affected Israel. I mean, officially, the death penalty, civil death penalty, was abolished in Israel in the 50s, but um, the military could still impose it, but it's never really been enforced. And in fact, the last death penalty handed down was for a terrorist who carried out two suicide bombings at the Afula Central bus station. Afula is not too far from Nazareth, about maybe half an hour away. But this sentence was appealed, and that person was later their sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. What happened? Gilad Shalit deal. This person was released. Because you know a lot of terrorists got released in exchange for Gilad Shalit. Now, you remember that awful incident where those two Israeli soldiers took a wrong turn into Ramallah and they were basically torn apart by the mob and, you know, they were disemboweled and goodness knows what else. Horrifying, horrifying, merciless, evil slaughter of these two. Well, that one of their killers, a brute, actually escaped execution, and he was just released in the latest deal. You know, these are the kind of sickos that are getting out. And so this, what this lady was saying, this columnist, she says, and so I have changed my mind. Israel must institute the death penalty for terrorists. This is a matter of moral survival, not only as a deterrent, but first and foremost as a matter of justice and as a tool to prevent further terrorism. Of course, nothing prevents recidivism than being than being executed. You know, you don't get them reoffending after that. It has become clear that this is the only way Israel can deliver true justice to terrorist murderers. And then she goes on, says, according to data from Palestinian Media Watch, which tracks payments made by the Palestinian Authority to terrorists, no fewer than 160 terrorists serving life sentences and released in the latest deal walked out of prison as millionaires. The Palestinian Authority's policy of financially rewarding those who shed Jewish blood pays off handsomely both for the terrorists and their families during their time in prison, and all the more so when they are released prematurely. What has emerged is a corrupt and perverse reality, a society saturated with smiling, well-fed murderers and not living too far from the families who have been torn apart by grief. They said if we instituted this, reinstituted the death penalty, this lady was saying that murderers would no longer be released after a few years with smiles on their faces. Bereaved families would not be forced to relive their anguish. Terrorists would not return to terrorism. There would be no more Yahya Sinwars sentenced to 5 life terms, but released in a deal and then responsible for the worst massacre in the country's history. You know, there's a lot to say for this, and these people are unrepentant, evil killers, and who will want to do exactly the same thing again. So, that really, you know, something needs to change. I think she's very right. Um,
What
now,
are some of the reasons
one
why
last.
Israel isn't doing the death penalty? Is it just maybe a love of life in the Jewish consciousness? Why
I
don't
think
they give justice?
I think it's more to do with leftism, you know, and uh, uh, it's where you know the same thing kind of. I mean, I think like I mean, like Great Britain in the 1960s. I think it was 64, 65. They abolished the death penalty, but I really do think this is one of those things that is part of. And it's just on my personal opinion about it. I'm not, you know, is that it's one of these things where uh, I think where a society is departing from biblical norms. Because around about the same time, like for instance in Britain, that you got the abolishment of the death penalty, within a few years, you also got the legalization of abortion.
Hmm.
And both these things are, in a certain way, are connected, of course, because you know the reason, at least in Genesis, the reason that is given for the death penalty in cases of willful murder is that man is, you know, human beings are made in the image of God, and in a sense, it's a slap against that when someone murders somebody else. It's an incredibly grave and serious matter. And I think once you remove the death penalty for willful, deliberate murder, then it starts to trivialize these things. And it's exactly the same thing we now see in Britain and parts of Europe in regard to rape, where, you know, young girls' lives are completely ruined, and they are left distraught and damaged permanently because some foreign migrant, you know, does awful things to them and violates them. I mean, this I don't know if you've seen this horrible case in Sweden where this young girl was, I think she's 13 years old, I think. A foreign migrant raped her, this Muslim migrant raped her, and when the case came to court, the judge ruled that this migrant would not be deported because the rape didn't last long enough. You kind of you want to fall
Unbelievable.
out of your chair. Yeah, I mean, how long does it
Unbelievable.
have to last? Does she have to stand there with a stopwatch while she's being, ravished by some evil scumbag? This is crazy, and it's a leftist judge that did that, by the way, in Sweden. I mean, I think this is all of this is connected. That we when you do these when we drop when the penalties for these things are reduced like this in this way, it trivializes the crime that's been done. These things are devastating, and
That judge
I
deserves a
think
millstone as much as the perpetrator.
yeah, absolutely yes. So yeah, that's so that's been these things are those things have been quite they're very very prominent at the moment in the news, and some smaller local things which are a bit weird. Well, one of them I mean, this is, I mean, when I read this to you, I mean, you think, what on earth, you know, this is a local story, but it's all over the press because it's shocking, actually. Even, I'm just, and this is entitled, a family buried a Holocaust survivor in the backyard so that they could hide her death and collect reparations. Now, this isn't the first time people have fraudulently tried to obtain benefits, but this was particularly shocking because it was a Holocaust survivor. Now, it's not being said here that they actually killed their relative. I don't think they did, but they actually just took advantage of the fact that she had expired and then buried her in the back garden and but yet continued getting the benefit payments for this, for the this poor woman, and but the way this reads like something from a Stephen King novel or something. It says, the body of a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor was found buried in the backyard of a villa in the northern city of Carmiel after being missing for several months. The woman's daughter and the daughter's partner admitted they had kept the woman's corpse in an ice cream freezer for 2 days. Then they buried her and just claimed her Holocaust reparation payments. Now, that the police were so shocked by this because the amount of deceit that went on with this, and just the fact that it was a Holocaust survivor as well. I mean, it it kind of it's a bit it's hard to know what to say about this. I mean, it's quite lucrative, I suppose, in one sense. You can see their motivations are very clearly financial. I mean, roughly speaking, this Holocaust survivor was receiving about I think it was about 20,000 shekels a month. I mean, that would be if you needed support, help round the home, and cleaners to come in and do work for you and things like this. It's quite a generous stipend. That it's about 5.5 to $6,000, and that can go a long way in Israel. But of course, if you're very old and you need palliative care and support and things, that's why it's quite a generous amount. But yeah, this has shocked the police. Even the police were shocked by this, and they see some strange things here. But that's just very sad that the thing is that the woman had another daughter in who lived near Tel Aviv, and she thought her mum had passed away, but then she was getting notices saying that the woman was still alive. So it's as you see, even within the family.
I hate to shock you, but 6,000 is very generous. Here in the US, We're talking about maybe $2,000 Social Security payments where we've had similar things happen many
Right.
times for
Yes, and of
a
course that
lot less money.
yes, and of course you've always got in the US also you've also got a lot of dead people turn up to vote too, don't they?
Yeah,
They turn up to vote
yeah.
Democrat, you know. But yeah, that is just a very sad case though. This one, I thought, it's a bit, it's really, I don't know. Yeah, well, sticking your grandma or whatever it is in the freezer as well. I mean, it really is. It's a bit. It's so disrespectful to someone who's gone through so much suffering just to chuck them in the freezer and then dig a hole in your garden and cover them up in that way.
Uh,
I mean, especially in Judaism, where right handling of of a deceased person um, is so important here. And the disrespectful way they've treated the mother and everything is really that's pretty bad. Even
the love of money.
uh, yep, it's a root of all kinds of evil.
Yep.
One more thing here. This is how crazy and lunatic um, some of the leftists here. These hate BB people. I mean, how twisted they can be. This is a college professor, and this is in a place called Tel Chai. It's I don't know exactly where this what it, but it also deals. Tel Chai is one of those places. It's in the north. I know where it is now. Um, and this also deals with candidates and training. I think for the Air Force as well. But this lecturer, Dr. Ilana Hairston, said that she published an article, and it's in October the 7th, and she said 2 years on from the Hamas atrocities. She said that the proper place for this government is prison, and she wrote, just as the Third Reich forfeited its right to exist, so too has the State of Israel. She also accused Israel of committing genocide and calling it a genocide state. Now, this is an Israeli that's doing this. This is how twisted and messed up they are. And she said, just as murderers and rapists possess a right to exist in prison, so the Israeli leadership deserves long life behind bars. She continued, the testimonies of the detainees from the Gaza flotilla. This is the Greta Thunberg clown show. Just as the testimonies from these detainees from the flotilla are horrifying, the genocide state in full display, beatings, being held kneeling with hands cuffed behind the back for hours, denial of medical treatment, degrading treatment and threats, not to mention that abducting the people from the international waters constitutes a violation of international maritime law. You know, Israel treated Thunberg and a cloud of Muppets with kid gloves. They could have actually been arrested and put in jail for for trying to break the blockade, the legal military blockade into a combat zone. They just got put on planes and sent back with sandwiches or something like that. But this is how deranged some of the left are over here. I mean, we have the loony left here, just like they have in Britain, and just
How
like you've got,
dare you?
yeah, yeah,
Sorry.
the crazy
Had to do
people
it.
in California as well, or in the in the States. These people are just filled with hate, and even it's well, words fail,
I mean,
but that's
if I were Israel, I would have hired some of the Somali pirates to protect the blockade and see what would
yeah.
happen to the what would have happened to the Thunberg flotilla if they were in charge.
Yeah, I think Thunberg, though, I mean, she's been exposed even in Sweden as a complete liar. She made a load of false accusations when she got back there, and people know what she's about really now. I think that they're not convinced, but that's really the main stories from this week.
Thank you so much, Elon. I would
Okay,
like
well,
to
that's
continue to encourage everyone to pray for Israel, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Till next
yeah,
week.
and just amen.